Is it possible to have too much of a good thing? To be too good looking, too interesting, or perhaps too famous? Well, the subject of this story had all of those things in abundance. Christine Keeler was too attractive to men who should have known better, too interesting to the press, and a result of these, too famous to live a normal life. But there's one other too much about Christine Keeler. Too much information. This scandal was such a big deal, and still remains such a big deal, that it's almost impossible to establish what the facts are and what is not true.
In 1963, the British government was involved in a scandal so big that it cost a minister his job, the Prime Minister his job, and lost the faith not just of the British public, but very nearly its biggest ally. How did this all come about? When John Profumo, the Secretary of State for War, met Christine Keeler, who was at that time 19 years old, an aspiring model with some dubious friends. Profumo took a liking to Christine and saw her more and more often.
But there were two problems with this relationship. Firstly, John Profumo was comfortably married to another woman. Secondly, another of Christine's lovers was a man called Captain Ivanov, who was not only a Russian diplomat, but also potentially a spy who had expressed quite a lot of interest in obtaining British state secrets. Now, none of this would look good for a man who was a member of the British cabinet. John Profumo did his best to keep the affair a secret.
For a little while, this was quite easy thanks to a legal device called libel. Now, libel is the word we use when someone writes something that is both untrue and designed to damage another person's reputation. If anyone tried to spread the story, they could expect a letter from Profumo's lawyers. Now, if you were a journalist, would you publish a story against a government minister if you knew he would probably sue you for libel? My guess is you'd want a lot of evidence that it was true before you'd even consider it. More evidence, perhaps, than the story of a young woman who spent most of her time with criminals and spies. Well, the threat of libel kept a lid on the rumours for a while. But then came some bad news for Mr. Profumo. Johnny Edgecombe, one of Christine's other boyfriends, was arrested for attacking a rival and later shooting into the house where Christine was staying. When he went to court, who was expected to be the star witness? Well, of course, it was Christine Keeler. And what happens to be a defence to libel? Well, court proceedings. Once she got up in that witness box, Christine could say whatever she liked, including, potentially, mentioning her affair with John Profumo. And the press could report on it all without any fear of libel. Not something that Profumo wanted to encourage.
Now, as it happens, another defence to libel is called parliamentary privilege, and this is where an MP asks a valid question in the public interest in the House of Commons or the House of Lords. This will become quite relevant later on in the story. But just before I tell you about that, I'd like to say that I make these videos for interest, not for publicity and not for profit. If you're enjoying hearing the legal stories, or if you just like to hear about history, then please click the subscribe button. It notifies you whenever I release another video. It's completely free, and it also makes my day to know that people are watching and enjoying these videos. Thank you. So what happened next? Well, as it turned out, that case did not break John Profumo's story to the public. Christine, the key witness in the case, was spirited away to Spain, and neither the prosecution nor the defence seemed to make a lot of that. The case went ahead as planned without Christine. She didn't end up in the witness box, and John Profumo's secret stayed that way for now.
Now, as you can probably guess, that wasn't the end of the affair. Members of Parliament started asking awkward questions quite openly. They could do this because, as I mentioned earlier, parliamentary privilege makes the House of Commons a safe haven against litigation. As representatives of the people, MPs have to be able to hold the government to account. And this just wouldn't work if they were scared of being sued as soon as they sat down. With encouragement from the government's legal advisers, Profumo beat off the accusations in the Commons. He made a public statement that he had only ever had polite relations with Christine Keeler. The problem is that this was just not true, and by now a lot of people actually knew it. Thanks to some of the investigations into her friends and ex-boyfriends, the police knew. The Secret Service knew. Journalists and opposition MPs knew. Christine Keeler was again the key witness in yet another case against one of her ex-boyfriends, giving her another potential platform to tell her story. And to cap it all off, Christine's guardian, Stephen Ward, the man who had introduced Profumo to her, was getting nervous after he was investigated heavily by the police. Ward started sharing Christine's story with everyone he could think of in order to divert attention from himself. He even wrote to the Prime Minister. It was all too much for John Profumo, who resigned.
So what happened after the scandal? Well, Harold MacMillan, the Prime Minister, resigned himself after just a few months in October 1963. In 1964, the British government fell, ending 13 years of Conservative government. Captain Ivanov, the Russian diplomat, had left for Russia as soon as he heard that the news of the scandal might be about to break. As far as we know, he carried on having a successful career as a diplomat and civil servant in his home country. Stephen Ward, the man who had introduced Christine to both John Profumo and Captain Ivanov, was accused of taking money for Christine's services. He committed suicide on the final day of his trial. John Profumo tried to lead a quiet life after that and devoted himself to charity work. And what of Christine herself? Well, she died in 2017, but not before she got her day in court. Unfortunately for her, this time she was not the key witness, but had actually been accused of falsifying a testimony in a previous witness statement. This is called perjury, or contempt of court, and Christine pleaded guilty at the time. However, this may not be the end of the Profumo affair. Firstly, because one of Christine's dying wishes expressed in her will was that any attempt possible should be made to clear her name. Christine's son is convinced that perhaps her earlier conviction was unsafe and should be overturned. Secondly, at the time the news broke, the British government tried to clear up the mess by asking one of the main law lords of the time, Lord Denning, to investigate, hear testimony from each of the parties and report on whether he thought there had been any wrongdoing or leakage of British government secrets. Now, Lord Denning effectively cleared all of the parties of wrongdoing and said that he thought there had been no leakage. However, if you read the report, he spends a lot of time explaining its limitations. Now, I wonder if there might be a little more to uncover about Profumo that we haven't already heard. Thanks for watching.